Hi and welcome to my channel. Today I'm showing you how to crochet sleeves, which you can add to a sweater or cardigan project. In this tutorial we are going to be crocheting sleeves that are made using granny stitch, and they are worked flat in panels before seaming them together. Optional color changes and a cuff are added before finishing. Let's get started by choosing our materials. I'm using a 6mm crochet hook, and you will need a second smaller hook for the cuff. I use a 4mm. The yarn is an Aran worsted weight. To start working the sleeve, you'll want to chain an amount that when folded fits the circumference of your arm at the shoulder. So you'll begin by chaining a multiple of 4 with the 6mm crochet hook. For example, I'm chaining 64, which gives me approximately a 14-inch chain to fit around my arm at the shoulder point. To begin the stitch motif, we'll be working granny stitch. Granny stitch is made by working 3 double crochet into the same stitch space. Count 4 chains from your hook and work 2 double crochet into this space. The turning chain that we just counted will count as a stitch here, so you really have 3 double crochet total. Next, you'll count another 4 chain spaces and begin working the next 3 double crochet, which we're calling a double crochet cluster, into that space. Notice I'm not chaining between stitches here. You'll repeat this stitch again, counting 4 chain spaces and working 3 double crochet into that space. You can see how the granny stitch clusters are taking shape. Continue working this way down the length of your chain, and when you get to the very last chain, you're going to work a complete double crochet cluster. At the end of your row, fold the cord around your arm and make sure that it fits at the shoulder underarm area. If you count the amount of granny stitch clusters here, it'll depend on how many chains you started with. For me, I started with 64 chains and I have 16 clusters, which measures approximately 14 inches. To begin working the second row, you're going to continue in the same way. You'll chain 3 as the turning chain and begin working the double crochet clusters between the clusters made on the previous round. So continue working 3 double crochet clusters into each space along the row. When you get to the last stitch, you will work 1 double crochet into the turning chain from the start of the first row. This squares off the row, so you will have a single double crochet on both ends of your work. You'll begin working row 3 just as you did row 2 by chaining 3, turning the work, and working into the first space between stitches. On this row, you will work directly into the first space between single double crochet and the next double crochet cluster. Work 2 double crochet here because the turning chain counts as a stitch. Carry on working the next 3 double crochet cluster into the stitch spaces along the row, just as you did in row 2. At the last stitch of this row, you're going to work a whole double crochet cluster into the final stitch space. You will also notice that the number of your double crochet clusters will alternate per row. I started with 16 on the first row, and I have 15 on the second row. Each odd row will have 16 and the even rows will have 15, alternating at the end of the rows by finishing with a single double crochet versus a whole double crochet cluster. You'll see how the spaces develop on your odd versus even rows. Your work will generally guide you based on the symmetry of your stitches. To start working the 4th row, which is an even row, chain 3 as before, and you will skip the first double crochet cluster and work between the spaces created from the previous row. The turning chain still counts as a stitch, so you will see it as 1 double crochet here. Continue working in the same way you did for row 2 across the row. When you get to the end of row 4, you're going to finish with 1 double crochet into the last stitch. Continue building the length of your sleeve until it reaches about 20 inches. Color changes can be added as desired at the start of any row by attaching a new color and working in the same pattern. I chose to work the last 2 rows of my sleeve in a different color. So to do this, I attached the yarn onto the hook in a new color, and I like to work one single crochet incorporating the new strand just to secure it. Chain 3 and work the next row in the same way you did as before, whether it's an odd or even row. The new color will add a nice visual effect to the sleeve, and this could be done in stripes or color blocking. You should have a flat rectangular panel by the time you're finished. Mine measures approximately 14 inches wide by 20 inches long. This is about 36 granny stitch rows for me. You will fold along the long side to designate one end as the cuff and one end as the shoulder. You can hold the sleeve up to you to make sure that you like the length, and just know that the cuff is going to add a bit of length also, so leave a little room. Before you start working the cuff, you'll need to seam the sleeve closed. To do this, fold your panel in half along the long side. Seaming from the inside out makes the join less visible, so to do this, work your join along the inside or the wrong side of the work. You can choose which joining method you prefer here. With both long sides touching, make sure the granny stitches are lined up so that the sleeve is even. You'll attach the yarn and seam both sides together along the center of each cluster and the spaces in between. I work a slip stitch for my join, but it's optional to work another preferred joining method here if you prefer. At the end of the row, cut the yarn and secure it. Once the sleeve is joined, turn it right side out and begin working the cuff. The cuff will be created in the round, and if you prefer to change color here, go ahead and do so. Changing to your smaller hook, here I'm using a 4mm, you will create an edge to work into. This edge brings the sleeve to a smaller opening at the wrist. So I'm going to loosely slip stitch for 16 slip stitches across the length of this sleeve. I'm going to be working a slip stitch basically into the spaces between granny square clusters and working over each cluster. Do not work too tightly on your stitches here, just loosely pulling up the yarn to create a long slip stitch. Join into the beginning slip stitch at the end of this round. I have 16 slip stitches spaced around based on the amount of granny square clusters I have here. You should try it on to make sure this fits your wrist and is not too tight. We will now work the rib portion of the cuff. The amount that you chain here will determine the width of your ribbing. I chained 7. Working into the very first chain space from the hook, you're going to complete a half double crochet. You're going to work down the chain for 6 half double crochet total. Working a half double crochet into each chain until you reach the edge of the cuff. When you reach the edge, you will see those chains that we created to cinch the wrist. Remember, I have 16 chains here. We're going to be working into these chain spaces, and we're going to work below both loops of the stitch head to secure it. You're going to have a vertical bar that we're going to work into those chain spaces, and we're going to attach it with a slip stitch into this first space. We will now work into that band that we created for another row of half double crochet, paying attention to work in the front loops only. Looking at the stitch heads, you'll see 2 threads of yarn. Insert your hook into the front loop and work your half double crochet here. Continue for 6 half double crochet towards the top. You can see that working into front loop only gives that ribbed look of the cuff. At the end of this row, we're going to turn the work and begin working a 3rd row into back loop only for 6 half double crochet down the length of this band. Work it in the same way, except you're going to be working your half double crochet into the back loop of the stitch. This is going to complete our 3rd row of ribbing. And when we get to the very last stitch, we're going to want to join it back onto the cuff of the main sleeve. And how we do that is by working into those chains that we created when cinching it smaller for the wrist. So I'm going to work a slip stitch into the first chain and into the chain next to that. I'm going to turn the work before working another vertical row of ribbing. Alternating between front loop only and back loop only creates the ribbed look. You should roughly have twice as many ribs as you had chains at the wrist. Since I had 16 chains, I have about 32 ribs. This is because you will work going upwards and then coming back down, so that's 2 ribs per chain space. Ending on an even rib at the point where you've reached the end of the cuff towards the wrist, you will slip stitch the cuff closed. So begin by finding the last open space at the end of the sleeve where we did those granny clusters and slip into that space. Begin by holding the cuff together and aligning the stitches. You can work a half double crochet here, but I'm just going to single crochet. Insert into the 2 interior stitch heads and just work a single crochet stitch here. The interior stitch heads will mimic the look of that front and back loop only, so that's just a technique that I like to do. Be sure at the very end working upwards to capture that last stitch so that your sleeve does have a nice finished look at the end. At this point, you should be able to cut your yarn and sew in all edges. And that's it. You've just learned how to crochet sleeves for your cardigan or sweater. I hope this tutorial made the process easier for you and gave you the confidence to finish your project. Crochet is all about patience and creativity, so if you ever feel stuck, take your time and enjoy the journey. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment below. I love hearing from you and helping out where I can. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and more crochet inspirations to come. So hit that notification bell and you will never miss a video. You can also find me on Instagram at City Bright Knits, where I share behind the scenes projects and more crochet fun. Thanks so much for spending your time with me today. Keep creating, and I'll see you in the next video.